We're live. Just check.
For an individual who has been struggling to integrate for an extremely long time, or struggles to cope with the day-to-day pressures of trying to integrate, I think it's so unfair on the side of opposition where they hate upon individuals who are just trying to fit in and trying to overcome the harms of being excluded and feeling like they aren't enough. For far too long has that happened, and I think on the side of government, we strongly oppose any form of animosity or hatred or shaming of individuals who are simply trying to fit in and make their own choices. The first thing I'll say is that the burden on the side of opposition is to tell us why it's justified for you to hate or shame upon individuals who have differing priorities compared to you. Why it's justified for you to shame individuals who are simply trying to make their own choices which are meaningful to them. On their side, they need to support a world where individuals who are trying to escape the day-to-day pressures of feeling like they are shit and never enough continuously are made to feel guilty for those choices, and I think that's extremely unfair. The first argument, why it's principally unjustified for you to shame these individuals and use them as social battering rams for you to attain some form of arbitrary change or inclusivity or empowerment, which you cannot quantify, and oftentimes it's very difficult for you to prove that you will have it. The first level to this is that these are individuals who never consented to any harms that their culture will bring upon them. They never consented to feeling like they're never enough. Because recognize on a day-to-day basis, the majority culture still continuously is glorified, still is made to look like that's the perfect culture that you need to fit into. It's still made to look like you're most beautiful if you have your hair straight. People still glorify it to an extent. Oftentimes, if you are a minority with like curly hair, or like if you wear a tudung, if you wear a hijab, then you're straight away looked upon as less attractive, or you always have to deal with media or people in general portraying you as less attractive or less of important, or like you're never enough. These are harms that you have to face on a day-to-day basis that I think individuals never consented to. It's extremely abhorrent for you to force individuals to want to deal with these harms even they never asked for it. It's so unfair for the majority to continuously feel confident and great about themselves and have individuals who are trying to escape this cycle of feeling like they're never enough and more importantly never even consented to these harms, and it's unfair for you to force them to continuously do it. The second reason is because these are individuals who are struggling emotionally, who constantly have to feel depressed because they have to compete with other individuals, because whatever they do, they feel like they still have that setback of their culture or the person that they are. When they go for a job interview or generally like they're less confident, and this literally affects their day-to-day lives. If having straight hair makes me feel more confident, or like taking off the hijab makes me feel more confident, I still think that helps you overcome your emotional insecurities which minorities continuously have to face. I don't see why you have to force these individuals to face these harms and shame them for wanting to opt out of it. Before that, sure.
Why can't we feel angry because some people leave, in doing so, leaving you behind with the same harms that they were escaping?
Oh, I think it's quite simple, and this is my third level, because you chose to stay. I think that oftentimes these are individuals you want to protect on your world, or you feel it's justified for them to shame individuals. These are individuals who feel like their culture is important to them because they actualize through their culture, because they feel like their culture is important, and they're willing to take trade-offs. They're willing to take trade-offs for it. So even if I feel like I'm not enough, I'm still willing to wear the tudung because that makes me feel happy. That makes me feel like I'm a better human being. That's your way of self-actualizing. Another individual feels like their way of self-actualizing is not through that culture, it's through obtaining different forms of success or confidence or things like this. I think that's a difference in the way you self-actualize. I don't see why it's justified for you to put if you identify through your culture and you want to continuously do it, I don't see why, and you want to stay and like continuously embrace your own culture, I don't see why another individual has to continuously deal with the same pain.
Yes.
Even you consented to that pain and you wanted to stay and you don't mind you don't mind those trade-offs, the other individual minds it and wants to leave. I don't see why it's justified for you to shame these individuals. The last, the second argument is why this creates tangible harms where individuals feel like resent their culture even more. So I think that if on our world, we still have, even though you try to embrace the majority culture, even though you try to dye your hair, you try to like integrate with them, you will always still relate to the problems of the minority. You will always still feel like as you went through those same struggles, you will always still relate to their sufferings and their problems. So on our, I still think that you did in these individuals to be somewhat connected to the struggles of their culture and their community, and you always have an incentive to talk about it, or like even to share their personal experiences, things like this, because they still relate to it. On their world, when you antagonize them, when you make them feel guilty, when you do things to like shame them even more, I think they resent the culture and the community even more, because you continuously make them feel guilty for their choices. I think this is when they're less likely to talk about the struggles of the community, or less likely to even support the community or do things that relate back to the community as a whole, because they feel like the community itself resents them. They're you get individuals who don't want to try to disassociate from their culture even more, because they feel like no matter what they do, the community still makes them feel guilty for their choices. This is when you get individuals leaving their home or like trying to pull themselves even further away from their parents or their community, because they just feel that their choices are not being respected, then you'll always be made to feel guilty. These are individuals who continuously try to integrate more into the majority culture, resent the community, as compared to our, where you will still get them relating to the problems of the community, maybe, and still trying to fight for those problems and still trying to do whatever they can, because they still relate to the problems, even though they chose a different path, but they would still relate to the suffering of these individuals. With that, never been harder to propose.
Thank you for the speech. Now let's invite leader of opposition, Kevin.
What? Do I have to go up and do it, Mike? Hello, can you guys hear me? Hello. All right. Chair, you can tell by my accent that I am privileged. You can tell by my accent that I just went Burger Lab and that I'm wearing a Uniqlo flannel because I'm a basic white boy who has a lot of privilege, who has a lot of things favoring me that are working to my advantage. The only reason that I have the option to do this is because of the education I had, is because of the wealth that I had. And we say that for the average Chinese individual who is poor, who is disenfranchised, who may not have nearly as much resources that I have, I do not choose to stay in my culture. I am locked inside by external forces, or at least they are locked inside by external forces. They are locked inside beyond their control, and they suffer the abuse of people like me. We think that is morally unacceptable. We do not think that your own self-profit should outweigh a community that is in suffering, that has no other alternatives. That will be the framework of this debate. I'm going to make two main arguments within the speech. Firstly, why the individual owes a duty of care to the community, and more importantly, right, something they never engage with, why at least the group or the minority owes an obligation to those who stay, right? Because that's something they refuse to deal with in their entire speech. Secondly, I will show you how you compromise the entire movement's momentum and exploit the vulnerable for your personal profit. But before I get into that, I'm first going to characterize, and then I'm going to deal with some miscellaneous rebuttals that will not be integrated. Firstly, characterization. A. Recognize that this is something where you can choose, which means that your parents didn't give you, that your parents gave you plenty of things, that you had two viable options. So you are the one who's deliberately choosing to abuse the others. You're not being forced into it. Secondly, we want to clarify that if they can choose, that probably means that they are privileged to know English, that they are privileged enough to have the clothes to fit in, to not face microaggressions at every single opportunity. And thirdly, They want to put on this argument that they're suddenly going to launch movements, that they're suddenly going to work with their communities, and they're suddenly going to benefit everybody. This is completely absurd. This is not even in the motion, right? It's to the exclusion of your own community. That means that you don't form movements. It means you exclude your community, you refuse to work with them because you feel that they are at a disadvantage and you never want to go back, right? You are unlikely to come back. And on top of that, even if you do come back, we don't think we would even want you to come back in the very first place. We do not think the minority movement would even want to acknowledge these individuals, even if they don't have outright animosity, because they're going to be weaponized. We'll show you this to you later. We also want to highlight the contradiction in that alone, because that already concedes that they want these individuals to help. We'll show you why they're more powerful on our side in helping these individuals. That's actually the first argument. Why exactly do you owe a duty of care to the community and the culture that raised you? Or at least, at the very least, why the group owes that to the people who support them? Firstly, recognize that you parasite upon the accomplishments of others. That is to say, you profit because everybody else worked for you. You profit because the blacks have slaved for years in order to be able to have the economic power to raise a movement. You profit off of the martyrdom of those who worked in civil rights movements. You profit, the very fact that you have the power and the wealth and the education to even have this escape mechanism is solely because others have worked their backs off for you to have this power. And on top of that, every single affirmative action that the movement makes is going to benefit you as well. Even if you don't want to associate with the community, you will still benefit. If you profit that much off the toil and the suffering of others, you are morally accountable to them as well. You should at the very least consider them your friends. You should at the very least maintain some semblance of your culture and language, right? That is something that they refuse to deal with. We think that's morally abhorrent. Secondly, we want to deal with the most important thing, right? Because yes, maybe sometimes you can choose better options for yourself, but not when there's a third-party harm. Not when you violate somebody else's right to dignity, right to life, right? We say this is the case in labor unions, where governments are perfectly willing to mandate, at least some governments are willing to mandate people to stay in labor unions because they want to protect the overall public good, because they recognize that every scab is going to hurt the entire community and lower wages for everybody. They recognize there's a public harm and they realize that therefore you are not allowed to violate it, right? And on top of that, we win that because on the scale of harm, those who are vulnerable, those who are uneducated, those who have no options are the ones who need our help the most, rather than the privilege who have the ability to have both options. And on top of that, we also have the scale of quantity, right? Because more people are probably going to be disenfranchised, therefore more people do not have those opportunities. We win that scale as well. So these are the two tiebreakers that win it. And we also want to address, right, because they didn't actually provide, they tell us, as mentioned, that they actively consent into staying into their culture. As mentioned, we do not think this is the case. We've given you very careful characterizations as to why that is not the case. But what they should have ran is something like along the lines of lottery of birth. If they had ran that, we would have responded that lottery of birth also applies to us. Because on top of that, you have a higher quantity of people who are being abused by lottery of birth. And the lottery of birth is even further abused by the fact that you have some people who are using the excuse of the lottery of birth to abuse them. Secondly, right, if they ran something smarter like self-defense, that also applies to us. Because the group has to consider its own self-defense mechanisms. The group has an obligation to those who support them first and primarily, which means that the group should condemn them to protect themselves. That is a moral obligation. They need to engage with what is the moral responsibility of the group, not just the individuals. Let's deal into the second argument, where we actually deal with how the entire movement works. We're going to show you why an individual quitting, or likely a cascade of individuals quitting, if their arguments are that true, is going to compromise the entire movement's momentum and exploit the vulnerable for profit. Let's contextualize where movements are right now, right? They're at a critical juncture in which maybe they have some traction. Maybe racism is not quite as explicit, but there are still structural forms of racism, and it's going to be extremely hard to convince majorities to realize all these structural harms. And on top of that, if you do not do it now, and you do not pass it on to the next generation, they're going to forget these sorts of things exist. They're not going to do the studies necessary to preserve it, which means that the harms they incur are going to be permanent. They are going to create a generation that is going to forget that these harms exist, that will not campaign for it, right? So that means that we are at a critical juncture where we have enough momentum, enough power to push through, but now they suddenly want to pull out and completely abandon it just because we're slightly safer in this period of time. We think that they will never solve it. They are using a bandage for an open aorta. We do not think that they're going to stem the bleeding. They're not going to solve the issue, and they're going to be permanent issues as well. But moreover, right, how do we promote or at least optimize the movements as a whole? Firstly, recognize that the rightist politicians are going to weaponize you as a model example. That means rightist parties in Europe can reference this one Muslim that supports them and say, hey, this person was willing to abandon her culture, was willing to abandon her hijab just because they want to support us. Clearly, this is exemplative of everybody else. Even if they're in the vast minority of instances, right? They're just going to balloon across social media because it's so controversial. So it's going to create a cognitive bias. It's going to be an example that's used everywhere. That debilitates your entire movement. Secondly, we said that the fragmentation gets publicized at the point at which you cannot have a united response to condemn these individuals, and you say these people have some valid criticisms, we're perfectly fine as a group, the movement is perfectly accepting of them. We think that creates an intense, an innate principle contradiction that's going to be very hard to resolve, that can be critiqued very actively. Thirdly, recognize that we should always prioritize the most vulnerable minorities who cannot change and who will suffer more at the point at which you change it. And lastly, the movement cannot betray their own supporters, right? Because at the point at which you do not condemn those who abandon you, you are implicitly telling those who stay with you that you are lunatics, that you are delusional, that you should not support this movement, that you have no real rationale to support you. We think you owe a moral obligation as a group to the people who have the moral spine to stick with you, to suffer with you, to progress the movement. At the point at which you disenfranchise them too, the movement is going to break down. Except to be proud.
Thank you to LO. Now I would like to invite Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
This is being live.
Okay, Monesh, write that down, you boys.
It's not working.
It's not okay? Ask him to test. You want me to ask?
Let him solve his one.
You want me to ask? It's not okay? Let me ask him. Maya?
GG.
It's okay, you take care of like 3, 5. So, this, yeah. I'll get another microphone.
Okay.
Take care of myself.
Yeah, got it. Go.
Yes.
Panel, to a large extent, this isn't an active debate. That means all your principles of the obligations towards a group is something that is not substantiated if you didn't ground those principles with importance justified by outcome. The problem with Daniel's speech, beyond all the nice words of how you're principally obligated, how you're morally complicit, is the issue that they never proved how this actually aids the integration of your poorest minorities. They never told you how those individuals who are the most vulnerable, who are the most desperate, are going to gain an advantage towards integrating in a community and gaining opportunities. There will be 3 things I'll do in this speech. The first, levels of responses against Daniel's speech. The second, how you end up counterproductively worsening the integration of your culture. And the third, how you end up also continuously enslaving individuals in an obsolete culture that more often than not deprives themselves of the ability to access progress. So the first level of response we would have against Daniel's speech is the idea of principle towards accountability. These are accountable towards the individuals who are your individual support for your rights. I think those individuals wanted you to be able to access opportunity, wanted you to be able to gain jobs. Understand that the world is never going to be perfect, and due to the number of discriminations, the scale of discrimination in the past, it is also extremely hard to attain some form of complete integration. That means we think the prioritization should also be respecting these individuals' fights and also using those fights towards to your opportunities and gaining yourselves some traction, some ability to access education, access good jobs. Those are the things which actually respect that actually respects their fights. But the comparative is, if you continue with Yahweh, you lock yourself in echo chambers where you deprive yourself of opportunities. We don't think it's a principal obligation that's good for this debate. The second is a moral obligation towards your group. I think it's actually morally abhorrent for a group to impose a culture upon you which directly violates your personal autonomy towards choice. Specifically when your choice towards conforming towards a majority culture leads to you being able to access opportunities in which you would never have had in the other side of the house, right? This means that if your moral obligation is towards your group, I think it's better that you as an individual do not lock individuals away from accessing opportunities in which they should rightfully be able to attain. Third, do you have a right to choice? I think this debate on why it's justified to hate and be hostile towards these individuals has to be weighed upon two main metrics. The first, was their intent, and the second, was their third-party harm. I think to a large extent, individuals who choose to live a life whereby they don't conform towards your minority culture isn't the one that is explicitly targeting towards harming your minority group, but rather one that's towards their own benefit, in their own self-interest, trying to gain opportunities. This debate doesn't fear the possibility that it could be individuals that fight for you as well in the future. We don't see this intent in your world. It is not justified for to hate upon these individuals. The second, third-party harm. I think to a large extent, which I'll prove later in the argumentation, your third-party harm is when you garner yourself. You trap yourself in the world in which you are unable to access opportunities. You brand yourself as a culture, as a group of minorities, as unwilling to accept nuances, unwilling to accept differences, and just wants everybody to like their culture, to love their curly hair. That's problematic on their side of the house. So, onto my argumentation debate before I go on, for sure.
Is this choice to leave this group an easy and accessible choice?
Alright, so here's the comparative, right? Obviously in our world, we also have individuals who don't have access towards the choice. But it's about improving the amount of people who have access towards gaining the choice and gaining opportunities in the future. We think our side better provides that in this circumstance. Number one, how you counterproductively was the integration of your culture. I think it's important for us to know the context of this debate. It is extremely unlikely and borderline radical to expect you as a small portion of society to have an entire majority of people conform towards glorifying the culture, loving your curly hair. We think the standard of what integration should be really measured by shouldn't be thereby wanting individuals to love everything you have about your culture, but rather a mutual respect that exists within all forms of society in terms of how you have your own culture, your own tradition, and that's worth respecting. I cannot shame a culture. We think that is integration that's better on our side of the house. We think we achieve that, and you ruin your possibilities of achieving this integration. 3 levels of analysis. The first, we need to realize that individuals who conform have greater access towards a greater range of opportunities. This was the individuals who conform towards learning English and being fluent in that language, being able to access things like debating, like Danny, for example, or in multiple circumstances, individuals simply have better access towards jobs because they're more fluent in the language in which the employers can identify with. The problem with this then is that you need to recognize that these individuals, more often than not, have some degree of power and influence, and they are more often than not branded as images of individuals who are successful from a group of a minority that has been discriminated in the past. What does it look like? It's like Rashid Talib Omar, who is a Muslim senator in the US. We think if you disgrace this individual, you fracture your movement. I'll prove to you how. Second level, how you fracture your front towards pursuing greater integration of your culture. We need to tell you that when you show a fractured front, which you thereby do when you are acting hostile towards individuals who conform towards the majority culture, when you don't treat them as an equal, the problem with this is that I think your right-wing populists will thereby latch on this even more. They will say, why should I prioritize a culture or integrate with you if you as an individual can't even integrate with individuals of your own community? Specifically when those individuals of your own community have greater access towards choice, greater access to its education, have established past successes throughout their lives. The problem with this then is that it becomes easier for it to lose traction as a movement as a whole. We think it's problematic. On the second prong, we think it also makes it substantially harder for you to garner traction, individuals who have traction in the communities to pursue your policy to help with minorities. Specifically, these are likely to be individuals that have greater access towards such opportunities. People who conform with the majority white culture so you can get better education, so you can go to universities that can represent you in parliament. Thereby, we think these individuals are thereby zoned out in your world at the point which you lose the ability, at the point you zone them out and you segregate them from you. We think these individuals are less likely to help you, they're more likely to go with the right-wing populists then. The third, the negative stereotype against your own culture and your own community is extremely problematic. Because notice, the action of being hostile or having animosity isn't one that's as simple as saying, I don't like you. It's one that's just saying, I hate you and you are not one of me. The problem with this then is the way you brand your culture. You have the ability to interpret culture to your own perception, but what you cannot interpret is the way other people view your culture. If other people thereby view your culture as something that's dominant, where you are unable to accept that people have differences and you must respect those differences, I think there's a world. We have a more fractured front for your culture because the name of your culture is punished. People brand your culture as something that's not worth integrating, that's not worth accepting because you don't want to accept the individuals who have different forms of culture as well. Finally, we should know that a lot of these cultures have oftentimes values which are contradictory towards the majority opinion, i.e. things like conservative Muslim, conservative Islam have been making you wear hijabs, making you move to your auras in things which directly violate principles like bodily autonomy and access to choice. If you want to stop individuals away from accessing their own personal right of choice, you need to tell us what is justified in your world and why do you actually owe an obligation that ultimately leads to a greater outcome. And to judge this debate, we prove a better world of integration because we, at the very least, don't fracture a movement. We bid our time and we make change possible. Proud to oppose.
Thank you to DPM. Now let's invite individual opposition. KM.
We don't have my sorry. Langsung don't have like food. Takkan got no extra. Usually in audio you okay. No extra.
I think Rian was correct. This debate is not an active debate. This is not whether or not these individuals should make the choice as well. I think this debate is whether or not minority groups who feel like individuals have betrayed them should be able to show their anger and animosity, especially when there's a third party harm attached to it. Especially when them themselves as a community is now back-footed because of one privileged individual who wanted to make that choice. This debate, and I'm not going to engage on whether or not this choice can give this individual value or whether or not this choice is bad or good. I don't think that's just it. I think it's whether or not these minority groups should show animosity, whether or not minority groups should take a stand and say, this is not what my culture looks like, this is not individuals that I align with, and I do not respect the kinds of choices that individual makes. And I think this is why slight opposition will come in, because a lot of principles that Daniel told you, it's about how having more individuals staying in your community increases the ability for you to have some form of progress. But I think speaking out in and of itself is already an act or stance for social movement, because you are going to forward the cause in one way or another. I'll prove that in my speech, but I just need to point out a few things. Daniel told you that in a world where we shame these individuals, you say that we don't accept different forms of culture, and that's bad. I don't think that's true. I think it's because right-wing populists will use this to their own advantage. This is like Donald Trump going, hey, look at that African-American kid, he's my boy. Like those kinds of availability heuristics are the kinds of things that individuals who are more powerful in your world can use and weaponize those kinds of things. So it's harder for you as a society, especially a minority group, to fight for change. But what's the comparative? In the world of opposition, when you say that these are individuals that don't respect their choices, that is when you draw a delineation. That is when you say, this is my culture, that is not. So that's where these individuals come in. And I think there's some benefits that exist out of that. The second thing he said that, oh, they're now fractured and therefore we need to do something about it. I don't think that's true. I think the only way you're fractured is when you allow them to just choose whatever they want. The reason why I think that's what fractured means is because you're conforming to the majority by saying the majority culture is one that's better, and that's why you should choose to go to the majority culture. I think that's when you harm the minority movement even more, and that's why the minority groups need to take a stance in this scenario. Now, let me just ask a few questions. Number one, why do the rest get harmed to the point in which you leave, and that's why you as a movement and as a group should take a stance. Number one, I think you benefit directly out of any progress those movements make. This looks like African American individuals being able to vote or fight for policy changes or having civil rights in general, but then conforming to majority culture and not respecting the fight that individuals in the past have done. But why is this bad? It's because you benefit out of that very fight when you don't give back to the rest of the community. I think you do owe an obligation to fight back. And when individuals of the minority groups take a stand, when they have some form of anonymity, animosity, that is when those kinds of narratives is one that spread to the rest of the minority groups. And that's why it's easier for you to fight for change. Yeah.
Even in the worst case scenario, if people don't give back, don't you have a worsened perception of your party because you are unwilling to accept that individuals who are different and those differences must be respected for mutual integration, which is more productive for
Okay, I don't think it's about not respecting differences. In your world, you conform that differences should not exist, and that's why we should all be one homogeneous majority culture. In a world where you take a stance by saying that the minority culture is also as important, that is when you see differences is something that you should respect, and that is when you see differences is important, it makes a diverse society. I think that's how you get that change back. Alright. The second thing I'll say is that how it's more empowering when these individuals or minority groups have some form of animosity. Number one, I think you empower those who can't make that choice to opt out into majority culture. Realize that only the most privileged out of your minority groups are able to do the certain things we wanted to tell you about. Like having better education so you can improve your language to be as good as a majority culture. I think there's very privileged stances those individuals can take. But you as a minority group have to cater to every single one of your minority group. So how do you do that better? Do you not say anything when these individuals have a leeway to just do what they want? Or do you take a stand and protect the other individuals who can't? Do you like give them more confidence by saying you can be whoever you want, you can still have curly hair, you can still wear a tudung, and you'll be completely fine in your world? I think those are the kinds of stances your community as a minority group can take, and that is how you empower those individuals. The reason why this is important is because every single group is reliant on individuals in that group cooperating with one another. So if you know and you empower those very individuals that stay, that is when you have a better fight, because you know your community will always support you. You know that your minority group will be there for you and will empower you through and through. That is how you have more individuals being passionate for that fight, and that's why the fight is more likely to carry on. The third thing I'll say is that the moment in which you have some form of anonymity and call out these individuals and shame them and go to media and say that this is not what we want, there's a spotlight or some form of attention given to that issue. There will be some form of discussions as to why these minority groups feel that way and why it's a necessary stance for these minority groups to take. That is when there will be more analysis as to why minority culture is one that's so diminished, or as to why majority culture is something that this minority group should not opt into because there are adverse harms that happens coupled with it. Yeah.
So Beyonce is an individual who conformed towards the majority white culture, and yet she is able to stand up for the oppression against African Americans in America. Why is it an unjustified fight in which you don't want to take, where you want to hate Beyonce simply because she looks more white?
I think because the motion assumes you exclude your own culture and you conform to the majority culture, and that's why it's harder for you to fight for that change. But if it's all about fighting for that change, I think taking the uphill battle and being true to your principles shows some form of integrity to your minority group. When you push messages that say you can be successful even if you conform to minority culture, which is your own, that is when it's more empowering and more powerful. It's less impactful if Beyonce goes out and then comes back and says this, oh, blah, 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 we can be good also. Whereas the comparative is some individual actually going through it with integrity and not flip-flopping with the kinds of cultures that they align with. That is the success stories we want from the side of opposition. We concede it will be harder, we concede you may lose some form of opportunities, but the opportunities that you get are ones that are true. The opportunities that you get are ones that are empowering the individuals who can't afford to make that choice to change. Those are the individuals that we need to protect. Because if Rian wants to say that, oh, these individuals are very vulnerable, cannot get opportunities, both those individuals are very vulnerable and can't get those opportunities. So do we A, protect those individuals that can conform to majority culture, can empower the narratives and connotations that most individuals already believe on minority groups, or do we B, protect the minority groups who can't make the decisions for themselves? Protect the most vulnerable of individuals because they don't have enough resources to make that choice for themselves. I think in a comparative, it's very clear why we need to have some form of animosity towards them. This is debate. It's not about the practical outcomes of it, but I think it's about the principal integrity that minority groups should have, and they should take a stand regardless of how hard the battle will be, because that is what a minority group should be. It's a community and society. Be back to a close.
Now, I would like to invite Government with Kenya.
Go check. I know.
I think side of opposition largely misunderstood this debate because they tried to say that at the point at which you exclude your culture, that means you're suddenly going to abandon your people, you're suddenly going to abandon your community. We think that's a mischaracterization of the debate that we're having today. Just because you exclude the culture doesn't mean that you're going to exclude the people who put you there in the first place. You're not going to exclude your community. I'm going to be asking two questions in this debate, and hence two questions upon which this debate should be judged. The first is on the principle, and the second is which side better ensures the welfare of minority individuals in society. On the principle, right? Because a large chunk of their case coming from side of opposition is that you, as an individual, have a duty to your community. Coming from PM, they told us about, coming from LO, they told us about why you as a black individual owe a moral obligation to your community because they are part of your upbringing. We have a few responses to that, right? Firstly, we say it's morally abhorrent for you to violate the fundamental right to choice of an individual. That is, that even if you have this duty to your community, we think it's morally abhorrent for you to take away this fundamental right that is theirs, the fundamental right to choice that they have in order to pursue a better life for themselves. But secondly, we say that even if they have a duty to their community, it has to be directly proportional to the well-being of an individual. That means that you cannot violate someone's sacred right to having the right to choose, having the right to choose which job they want, having the right to choose what sorts of opportunities they can pursue in order to benefit the majority. But thirdly, even if we buy their premise that these people should go with their majority, with their culture, I'm going to tell you about how you substantially make it worse for individuals on the ground at the point at which they get further discrimination. But what has our principle been on side of government? And just notice the lack of response to this, right? We told you about how individuals shouldn't be used as battering rams. That means that you shouldn't use certain individuals in society just because you want to benefit a greater good in society, right? We say that the principle of agency, the principle of our right to choose what is best for ourselves is because first, we know what's best for ourselves as an individual. Secondly, we don't think it harms the people around them directly in a way that we have intent to hurt them, right? We say there are two pillars on which you determine whether something whether an individual should have the right to resent something or should have the ability to show animosity to something. Firstly, we told you about the idea of intent, right? That these people did not intentionally want to harm their group. We see that in and of itself means that it's unjustified for you to try and hate on them just because they accidentally hurt you. But secondly, we told you about third-party harm, right? They tried to say that you compromise your rights. We already responded by saying that it has to be directly proportional in which you owe your duty to the community in a way that doesn't violate your rights as an individual to a far greater extent, right? Secondly, you have the ability to opt out if you want to. Before I go to my second issue, yeah.
If the right to choice is so fantastic, then we're not locking these individuals up. We're just empowering the victims of these other individuals to speak out and have a choice to condemn them. What is wrong with that choice as well?
Okay, that's why I get into how it substantially hurts your community, right? I'll respond to it in this. Which side better ensures the welfare of minority individuals in society? What did we tell you? We told you an extensive analysis from both speakers coming from opposition that you undermine integration. Why exactly is this? Because understand that people pursue these and they change their cultures because they want to pursue tangible benefits for themselves. That they as a person did not consent to the harms that they were put on from their culture. At the point at which they want to pursue this, we think that they have the right to do so. How exactly on their side do they make it so much worse for minority? We say that you antagonize the image of minority groups. How does this happen? You get fracturing, right? That means that when they wanted to tell us about right-wing groups being able to point to a group of individuals that were like leaving their culture, we think it's far worse. We think it's far better for you to have at least a small group of minorities who genuinely support their cause. When you, on their side, coerce people into having to fit into this stereotype, fitting into your community, at a point at which they are unable to fully subscribe into their identity, means that they get the sort of fractioning that is so much worse on their house. That's where we think that even if we have some right-wing rhetoric on our side, they are on a scale that is far worse, right? But secondly, we say that you tarnish individuals on a individual basis, right? Because now they seem like bigoted individuals that can't accept other identities. When you don't recognize my right as a person to choose what sort of identity I want to choose for myself and the type of life that I want to choose, the type of life I want to live, means that individuals on the ground now look like bigoted individuals that look like they can't accept anyone other than themselves. That's where you feel the right-wing rhetoric that in which you seem to be like superior to other people. That's why we think that Wian told you how it's just you can't expect a minority individual to want a majority to conform to themselves. That's why we think their case falls on that area, right? But secondly, we told you, and this is very important, right? Because in the long term, this is how it harms them. You take away opportunities for themselves. And a point at which you point to certain politicians who had to conform the culture to get into certain places in power to begin with, that means that they are unable to leverage off their success. When you see Rashid Talib Omar or whatever that Muslim senator being able to be successful, even though she had to conform to a Western ideology and had to speak English and other sorts of things conforming to Western society, you're unable to latch onto that success that you get to improve your life as a whole. That's why you disenfranchise minority groups in which they have no other success, in which they live in a world in which they are already discriminated. You don't have a way out of that. You continue to be persecuted as an individual. On the streets, you continue to not have the ability to find job opportunities for themselves, that kind of thing. But lastly, we told you about how you enslave innocent individuals on a case-by-case basis. That is that even though on their side they want to pursue greater good for their local communities, we say on the fundamental principle, you violate those people's rights to choose for themselves. We think that's exceptionally important. Just in the same way, we don't kill an innocent being to try and prioritize 100 people. We think that right to liberty, to you as an individual, to choose what's best for yourself, is something unalienable and one that shouldn't be contested. For all those reasons, we draw the comparative, right? Maybe, yeah, it's nice. It's nice when you tell a black individual that you owe an obligation to your community. That may be a nice thing to do. But at a point at which you have so many material harms and you violate the principle of an individual to choose what is best for them, that's where you really you create the worst harms on their side. For all those reasons, we're very proud to propose.
Believes that minority groups should not hold animosity against other members of their group that choose to embrace the majority culture to the exclusion of their own. What an interesting concept. I've never heard of this before, and I'm pretty sure that the government team hasn't heard it either. It's so important. Anyway, let's start this debate, okay? Let's start this debate. We've argued to you multiple times from the side of opposition this very important premise. That kindness is the luxury of the privileged. There are some things that we just cannot let go, and for very, very good reason. We also need to understand something else. The premise onto which we should judge this debate to decide who wins and who loses, alright, is whether it is justified for these minority groups to be upset. Not about whether the people that choose to leave made a good decision or a bad decision. This is an important distinction and something that we've made clear in 3 speeches soon. Now, 2 things that we need to answer in order to understand whether this anger is justified or not. First of all, is this choice an easy or an accessible choice? And 2, are there grounded reasons as to why the minority group should be upset? Now, firstly, is this choice an easy and accessible choice? We tell you that simply it is not. Why is this inaccessible? Because it is easier for the rich and the privileged to access the majority culture, assuming that this majority culture is up there and we are down here. Alright, why do we say this? Because people like Daniel maybe can afford nice homeschooling, or other people like Daniel Daniel's clones, I don't know, can afford nice schools like Alice Smith or go to ISKL without scholarships. Whoa, alright? And these things are important because this allows us to integrate or let go of our old culture to assimilate with this bigger culture to make us more accepted amongst the people that have power, amongst the people that have money, and amongst the people that have influence. We sell ourselves away, we sell our dignity, we sell the dignity of our people and our history for the sake of our own personal benefit, and we think that this is good enough reason to be upset at these people. But then you might ask, so what? So what that these people go and do all these things, and so what that these people are now assimilating with the majority? We tell you that making the choice to leave gives a lot of personal benefit. We concede to that. But it isn't available to everyone. Not everyone can suddenly become a white man or join in with a white gang or whatever gang you want to join, the Malay gang, whatever gang. Alright? Because obviously I'm the only one wearing a baju Melayu here. Do you see anyone else doing it? No. You know why? Because no one has a baju Melayu. You know why? Because it's expensive. Who has the money? So why is it principally okay then to escape suffering for your own personal gain when others cannot? Is this not selfish? May I even say masturbatory? Right? I will tell you that a group will feel like they have been left, they have been abandoned, and will be ultimately worse off than they were before. It's difficult to feel like you haven't been ditched for the sake of this random person's own personal gain and personal victories. Sit down. It is a selfish move to make, and it is not unfair for a group that is already suffering to be upset at these people. How could it be unjustified to be angry? Because one of your own people, right, is now happy being a whole white wannabe nowadays, right, while leaving you. We don't think this is enough to justify a lack of animosity from the side of government. Now, secondly, we need to explore whether there are any grounded reasons as to why the minority group should be upset. Because obviously nowadays, principles are not enough. We need to have compact impacts and grounded, material in order to prove a point. Fine, but I'll take a POI first.
So, given that everyone will suffer either ways and staying will have to suffer, why is it fair for the minority group to show their anger towards individuals who have suffered instead of the structures of the oppression that they face?
Obviously, the whole point is for us to overcome this suffering and to overcome these structural barriers that hold us back. Now, these grounded reasons will explain to you why we can overcome that better when people don't leave. And I think my other two speakers have asked that enough. I've talked about that enough, so I'm not sure why you asked that question. I'm getting nervous now, it is a stream. Okay, so are there grounded reasons as to why these people should be upset? We tell you simply that the answer is yes, for a few reasons. Number one, political hijacking. We tell you that if people decide to join the majority or whatever is popular in their area, within their own little community, it becomes easy to split the group. What does this mean? Especially if we're talking about political alineations, if that's the word, right? You split up the group or you split up the minority. What does this mean? This means that you will have a very diverse group of minority people. But why does that matter, right? Because people in general choose what they want to see and they choose what they want to accept. What does that mean? If you have a small group of African American people that are Trump supporters and Trump is like, I don't like black people, or whatever it is that he says, alright? We tell you that it's easy for him to come up and say, look at all these people. It's a convenient solution for him and it's easy cop-out for him to say that, look, these people are on our side, they're not on your side, so go away and leave me alone. We tell you that it becomes ammunition for these people to continue powering the discriminatory remarks or discriminatory rhetorics to further oppress the people. Now, number two, it demeans the communal struggle. Now, it makes it look like suffering now becomes a choice because if people can just opt out, then why doesn't everyone just opt out, right? So, for people that really cannot opt out, it makes it look like as if these people chose to suffer. Oh, you choose to be oppressed, right? And it demeans the pain that the group has already experienced in the past by just leaving them behind and leaving them to die. Now, thirdly, it sets a standard to success. And this is highly linked with the kinds of examples and the kinds of analysis that have been brought up by the side of government, right? Because they make it sound that the focus of their speeches have all been like, oh yes, black man leaves black group, becomes white and then becomes successful and get lots of money and get education. And makes it sound like as if normal black people just can't do it. We tell you that this is morally not okay. It is not okay. Why is it that you can only succeed when you fit in? We don't think this is the case. And if it isn't the case, this is what we have to fight for. This is exactly what we like to solve through structural political change. More acknowledgement for minority achievements or minority representation in parliament. These are the kinds of things that we're pushing for. And this kind of splitting of the group makes it harder for us to do that. Fourthly, it changes the bar or the goal of the group. Because nowadays, under the side of government, what happens is you become more lean to simply assimilate and not integrate. Now, why is this bad, right? Because now you're creating a homogeneous society. This is a successful society that exists under the side of government. And we tell you that a homogeneous society is never as interesting, is never as colorful as a diverse one can be. We should always strive to accept people from all kinds of backgrounds, and that can only happen if we stick to our cause right till the end until we make it, right? Lastly, what about being different, right? Now, this was something that Jonathan brought up, because what is it about being different? Now you cannot be different, is it? Yes. We'll just say it, right? It's not about being different per se, right? It's about being with the group and fighting for the same struggles. Because it's better for us to be able to call out right-wing populists as a group, as opposed to fragmented little societies made of 5 people. We don't think that's efficient. If we want to move forward and we want to make our nations more diverse, more accepting, we have to do it together. We have to fight oppression together. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for your speech. Now let's invite all three sides. Here.
Let's repeat it for the 4th time. This debate is the choice of the group, because that is the centerpiece of the motion, that should be the centerpiece of the debate, or at least a major part of it. They cannot just narrow it into what is good, or what feels great, or what is masturbatory for these individuals. It is solely about what is going to be good, it is about what is good for the group, and also about these individuals. They have to deal with both worlds, they fail to engage with it in their entire case setup, right? I'm going to narrow this debate into 3 main issues. First of all, do the victims left behind really choose or opt into their suffering? And do they really deserve our protection? Or should they just be condemned at the expense of the privileged and the powerful? Secondly, is the movement furthered? But before I get into that, let's just point out 2 major contradictions within their case. Firstly, they tell us Beyonce. It is the exclusion. And we've said this many times, but let's not be pedantic anymore. Let's specifically show you why that is so damning for their entire case. At the point at which you believe that Beyonce can just step back in, at the point at which you believe she can do that, that means that she, the average individual is not going to be Beyonce. The average individual does not have millions of fans across the world. The average individual who tries integrating will not be able to have all those power structures, and if the world they characterize is so harmful, they're discrimination in every single opportunity, not only are they unlikely to do that, but even if they do, they incur all the harms that they're talking about, right? If they want to defend their right to self-defense, they have to concede that these people should just abandon their culture, that the culture is not important to them. But they want to stand for it while simultaneously stabbing it in the back, right? We do not think that is a consistent characterization. They needed to come up with something far more nuanced. But let's enter the clashes. Firstly, do the victims left behind really deserve our protection? And do they really opt into it? Firstly, we give you explicit characterization why they cannot choose. Like, of course, we concede. There is a spectrum. Some people maybe have options for both. Some people intentionally choose to stay. But there are a lot of people, and this is expressly true for minorities, that do not get to choose because they are uneducated, because they are deprived of resources necessary to gain a white accent, right? So for all these reasons, they are not going to have that power. And what do they tell us? The literal response that they tell us is that, oh, these people deserve it. Maybe that's not what they meant, right? Maybe they're saying, oh, it's like some people really do choose it, and maybe those people deserve it. But the narrative you send out, the signaling effect that you impact upon all of the society, upon all of the right wing, is that everybody who's left behind deserves it. Everybody could have just worked a little bit harder, gotten the right accent, gotten the right education, and they could have made it out. That is the crucial analysis that came out from Ali that breaks the tie. Secondly, their other response is that there's a right to choice that overrides everyone else's. Perhaps this is true to an extent, right? But look, recognize, we're not locking these people up. We're not telling the government to just shut these people down entirely, right? These people still have the freedom of choice. They can do it if they want. We think it's a bad idea, but they can do it if we want. The question then is, do we enable the other people to have a choice? Do we enable the victims of their actions to have a choice to speak out? If they love choice so much, they need to provide it to the victims, right? And if you think this is a wash between one person's right to choice and another, let's break that wash, right? From a practical standpoint, an analysis that came out in my speech. First of all, the quantity of individuals that are harmed. We think there are far more poor people than rich people, right? Let's just just naturally how the world works. And secondly, right, let's just characterize the scale of harm. For an individual who does not have an escape mechanism, for an individual who has to stay in his community, who has to work in a mamak surrounded by people of his own culture because there are no other job alternatives because of discrimination, they deserve our first and foremost priority, especially if we are the group that has sworn to protect these individuals in the very first place. Let's deal with the second argument that we don't even understand why they're defending it, but they did, so let's take advantage of that. Is the movement furthered on their side? Okay, firstly, let's talk about just fractured very quickly, right? First of all, at the point at which you break the principal consistency of the movement, at the point at which you break it, that means you're already sabotaging the people who do support you. That is why you look even more fractured when your principle is broken. Secondly, they say the right wing can hijack, but they can be condemned, right? When we have a united response, we can actually condemn these individuals. But secondly, they show us the public perception is going to backlash against us. But A, we do not want assimilation. We want integration. That can only happen when you break these structural barriers against these individuals. Secondly, peace is the luxury of the privileged and the powerful, as came out in Ali's speech. If you have legitimate reasons to be angry, you should be angry. You should condemn individuals who are stabbing you in the back and leaving you behind. And thirdly, you have to decide, right? Would you rather look like somebody who is angry and maybe get some discrimination, or would you rather look like a pansy who does not have a movement, who does not have a firm stance, who is principally contradictory? We think that is the worst characterization, because the tiebreaker is you lose your own support. You lose your own minorities who defended you, who worked to their backs to protect you. You're never going to win the conservatives. You're never going to win the right-wing media. We can see that. But who are you going to win? Your own people, the people who promised and pledged all their support to you. They are the most vulnerable actors. They are what you should have considered at the very first place, right? Exceptionally proud to oppose.
Reply to head up our debate, I would like to invite God reply. Here.
I think it's masturbatory to see such opposition not have any levels of to prove why the harms of privilege is what is exclusive to the minority group, even though privilege is actively a barrier of entry towards all communities, even the white status quo. We don't see it as explicitly a harm towards the community, but even so, I'll also tackle it, right? If that's the case, what then is the comparative that wins this debate? It is true that a lot of individuals are barred from accessing opportunities. So the winning argument then becomes, who gives these individuals greater access towards those very opportunities? A world in which you fracture your own movement, which you have levels of analysis in which you never dealt with, or a world in which you just want to say that you can condemn individuals who don't act as though they're part of your culture. A bit of clarification, right? I think emotion assumes that you betray your culture. It doesn't literally say you exclude your own people. And to a large extent, African Americans who actively chose to abandon their culture to conform to the majority culture didn't abandon their people. Clarification, Beyonce was from a poor African American community. She chose to conform to the culture, to climb up social ladders, to attain fame, and to attain opportunities. Let's see factual errors come out from their side of the house. The first thing I'll do is simple. Who achieves better integration? They say, Op's only argument in this debate is that you break a principle consistency. I think you won't have a principle that says you must conform completely towards your own original culture if you side with government. You say, if you have better access to opportunities, if you choose that particular culture and you gain opportunities through that platform, then it's perfectly fine for you to do so. We think we don't have a principle consistency on our side of the house. And second, they say there's right-wing individuals that can co-opt this narrative. We think it's only a problem that only worsens your image, and the point in which their solution towards it is condemning these people. Condemning these individuals who are part of a community is literally saying that you fail to integrate, that you fail to want to accept, and you just want to segregate individuals who are different from you. That's not integration in which you want to have. That's portraying yourself as a selfish group of minorities that just want to take power or take control. Specifically in examples like the Muslim community in the southern border of Thailand or in the Mindanao Islands in the Philippines. Those are communities that actually hate the part because they want the form of integration that you wish to fight for. If anything, integration happens better because we were the team that gave you a clear roadmap towards how we better integrate. When you achieve mutual respect, when it's okay for you to have curly hair everywhere, when it's okay and people mutually respect it but don't love it, that leads to a normalization of it at that point in time. That leads to better integration in the long run. You ruin it when you're fracturing of your movement. You never respond to those arguments on your side of the house. The third, is there reasons for you to actively be legitimate in hating and being hostile towards these individuals? They never dealt with John and Mine's rebuttals towards the idea of how you must have intent to justify this form of hatred. The third party harm we should clarify, what third party harms, these are individuals who can and who are willing to help you, but you actively bar and zone them out when you choose to be hostile, when you choose to hate, when you choose to be desensitized towards these individuals. We think, if anything, it is principally abhorrent for to choose their side and say individuals have no right towards their own individual choice, specifically when individuals who choose to conform actively give back to the community, like Beyonce. This is a principle in which we win. Second, they downplay the levels of struggles which you're actually trying to fight for. We think there are actual road plans towards how you want to fight for integration. The struggle we want to have is to say that African Americans should be able to achieve access to those opportunities regardless of their skin color. And we get that when the African Americans, like Rashid, they're able to become senators, and we're able to play on the narrative to make them role models, to make them empowering examples of how your community can actually attain success. When you actively zone these individuals away, we think you are far less likely to gain that ability to fight for a community, because you have less of an ability to show that a community has capacity to create change and to create better lives for themselves in these circumstances. I think the large problem with opposition's debate is that major arguments of privilege or principles ultimately had no outcome, and they were never exclusive towards a minority community from the very first place. If anything, we give you a greater roadmap towards how we achieve integration, over how we have less fracturing, and how we protect your overall community even more. Very proud to propose.